Good afternoon, everyone. Today's presentation is Put Your Best Fork Forward, Nourish Your Body, and Move Your Way to a Healthier You, presented by Rachel and Alexa. Alexa is a MSRD CDN, obtained her BS in Nutrition and Dietetics from Syracuse University and her MS in Nutrition from Stony Brook University. She completed her dietetic internship at New York Presbyterian Hospital and began her career as an inpatient registered dietitian. At NYPWCM, she currently works as a primary care RD at Weill Cornell Internal Medicine Associates and also sees patients at the Center of Aging each week. She works with patients with many different medical conditions, including prediabetes, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, digestive issues, and with those seeking weight loss and weight gain. She's passionate about family, friends, food, exercise, and her sweet lab mix. Thank you so much for joining us. Without further ado, I'm gonna have Alexa to the floor. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here today. So thank you, and thank you for that introduction. So this is a little about us, which already was mentioned, and Rachel actually was supposed to be here with us presenting with me today. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it in person, but we have recorded slides from her, so we'll be putting those at the end. And just to show, we had some pictures for us. I included a picture of my dog that was already mentioned. His name is Walter. So let's get started. So the objectives for our talk today, we're really giving this talk in honor of National Nutrition Month, which is March of every year. So I'm going to explain a little bit about National Nutrition Month. We're going to review how to create a balanced plate, discuss how to eat well on a budget, brainstorm ways to eat sustainably, identify different types of physical activity, and describe ways to add physical activity into your daily life. So a little bit of National Nutrition Month, and I'm just going to read a little bit about it from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. So it's an annual campaign that was created 50 years ago. So this is the 50th anniversary of National Nutrition Month, which is pretty exciting. During the month of March, everyone is invited to learn about making informed food choices and developing healthful eating and physical activity habits. So this year's theme, you can see, Fuel for the Future. So eating with sustainability in mind is a tasty way to nourish ourselves during every phase of life and protect the environment. A registered dietitian can help you create healthy habits that are sustainable and celebrate your unique needs. So I wanted to start just with a little bit of background and going over different food groups. So first we have protein. So when we think of protein, we're talking about meat, which I feel like is usually the first one people think of, fish, eggs, dairy products like milk, yogurt, and cheese. And then there's also plant-based sources of protein, which sometimes we don't think of as often, but things like beans, lentils, soy foods, and tofu are all good sources of protein that we can get from plants as well. And we'll definitely be talking about that more later in the presentation. And then we have our carbohydrates. So examples of carbohydrates are things like rice, noodles, bread, pasta, oatmeal and cereal, crackers, tortillas, quinoa, farro, and then also our sweets and desserts and sugary drinks have carbohydrates in them as well. So next we have our vegetables. So I split these into two different categories. So we have starchy and non-starchy vegetables. Both of them are vegetables, but we think of them a little bit differently in terms of where they fit on our plates and kind of what nutrition and nutrients they provide for us. So starchy vegetables, actually, they're called starchy vegetables because they're higher in starch or carbohydrate content. So those are things like potatoes, sweet potatoes, corn, peas, plantains, yucca, taro. Those are all starchier vegetables that we would count as carbohydrates for the meal. And then we also have our non-starchy vegetables. There's tons of examples of non-starchy vegetables. I just included a few here, but things like peppers, onions, mushrooms, leafy greens, asparagus, broccoli, bok choy, all good examples of non-starchy vegetables. And then we have our fruits. So lots of different fruits as well. I just included a few here, and I picked this really pretty picture of mixed berries that looks very good, but things like apples, bananas, grapes, melon, pears, peaches, mango. And, you know, I often hear people asking me about fruit. Does it have too much sugar? Should I really be eating fruit? The answer is yes, you should be eating fruit. It does not have too much sugar. It has sugar naturally, but it also is very high in fiber, and it's very high in different vitamins and minerals and things that are very good for us. I also get asked, are there certain fruits that I should avoid or that I should not eat? And the answer is no, unless you're allergic to one of those fruits. So all fruits can fit and be part of a balanced diet. They all offer, you know, different things. So it's good to have a variety, both with fruits and vegetables. And definitely would not recommend ever avoiding fruit for any health reasons. Again, unless you're allergic to them or there's other very specific needs that you're following. And then with fats is our last food group that we're going to talk about. So there is fat in things like nuts and seeds. There's fat in nut butters like peanut butter, almond butter, cashew butter, vegetable oils like olive oil, canola oil, avocado oil. Avocados then as well are a good source of fat. And then things like butter also are sources of fat. All right. So now that we've talked about our different food groups, let's talk about how we can create a balanced plate. So this is a tool that I use a lot with patients because I think it's helpful as a visual. Now, should all of your meals look exactly like this? Absolutely not. It's more just to give you a representation of maybe planning out what things to include with your meals, how much of them to include. It can just be helpful as a visual in that way. So you can see on this plate, we have a quarter of the plate is your protein. So they use grilled chicken as an example, but we already reviewed all those different types of protein that you could put there. A quarter of your plate is your starch or your carbohydrate. So remember that could include things like grains or breads, but also would include starchy vegetables, which we talked about. And then the remaining half of the plate is your non-starchy vegetables. So they include salad, broccoli here. You don't need to include 2 different vegetables. You can include as many as you want. The idea is by having your vegetables take up about half of your plate, it helps with the portion sizes that you're having of your starches and your protein. The other thing too, sometimes people will ask, you know, should I just have protein and vegetables? Should I not eat any starch at my meal? And I usually say include the starch. You know, we can talk about higher fiber carbohydrates, which offer different health benefits that you could include as your starch. But sometimes if you don't include one of these sections on the plate, you might leave the meal not feeling as satisfied by it, which then could sometimes lead to increased cravings or increased hunger after meals, which could then lead to eating more after a meal. Whereas if you just had a balanced plate that included all the food groups, you might feel satisfied and more full after the meal, and that might last a little bit longer. You can also see that the beverage included here is water. So we really want to try to choose unsweetened beverages without added sugars. So water is obviously a great example of that. Also things like seltzer water. So whether you like plain seltzer water, flavored seltzer water can definitely be included. Unsweetened tea or coffee can be included. People ask sometimes, is coffee something I should avoid? I mean, there's different things that you would want to consider, such as should you be having caffeine, depending on any medical conditions that you might have. But coffee itself does not have any calories in it. It's more what's added to coffee that we usually discuss with patients, because if you're adding a lot of sugar or pumps of syrup, maybe if you're getting your coffee from somewhere, that added sugar is what we want to try to limit in our diets if we can. And then there's also fruit included. So you can see there's half an orange included on the side. If you don't like eating fruit at the same time as your meal, it's also a really good option to have for a snack between meals if you're hungry. So, and I want to ask if anyone feels comfortable sharing what examples or what meals have you had or would you like to try that would include a protein, a starch, and a vegetable? Like what combinations sound good to you? Anyone want to share?
I'll take one.
Sure.
Just to kill the silence.
Thank you.
Got this wonderful oval Pyrex, huge platter. Open up a can of diced tomatoes, no salt.
Okay.
Then take fresh salmon on top of that. Cover
Great.
with sliced onions, scallions, green peppers, whole lot of herbs, herbs of Provence or whatever. Toss it in the electric toaster and go off and do something else. So it's about 5 minutes of prep and 45 minutes of I don't care what, because it's just doing its thing.
Right.
I've discovered a magic ingredient called cauliflower rice.
Okay.
Essentially no carbs, essentially no salt, but it has mouthfeel and it substitutes for carbs because I'm trying to keep the calories down. Got a huge amount of vegetables and the fish and the cauli, and it smells wonderful. The whole house says, "Oh, I want to have dinner."
Great.
And that's part of it, is having something to look forward to. So I'm not on a diet. I'm just eating with fun.
Great. Yeah, right. I think, it's sometimes when we're thinking about foods, we get so caught up in like, oh, it needs to be the strict diet or I need to avoid all these foods. But incorporating things that you like and that you enjoy is really important, especially for sustainability, which we're going to talk more about later as well. So in your example, then you had your piece of fish was the protein. It sounds like you had a lot of vegetables, but because you use the cauliflower rice rather than an actual regular rice, you actually don't have a starch then in that example, which again is okay. Not every meal is going to look exactly like this, but if you wanted to include a starch, you could use brown rice, wild rice. You could do rice and beans together, like on this example.
Potato is great because everything else generates this wonderful gravy.
Oh, okay.
So no butter or anything. And I'll do an apple bake.
Okay.
For dessert. So I have some graham crackers at the bottom of the apple bake and raisins and apples and pears and maybe some apricots.
Sounds
So I'm getting a
delicious.
lot of fiber, a lot of fruit, not a lot of carbs.
Right. Great. So yeah, and right, a potato, a good example of a starchy vegetable, that could be right as your starch then for that meal. That's a great example. It sounds, this is right around lunchtime, so it's making me hungry. Does anyone else have any? Okay, so I'm gonna go then to the next slide here. So this is another note that I like to use to give more examples of what could go into each of these food groups. So looking down on the bottom left side of the screen, you have the protein choices. So you can see chicken, turkey, beef, pork, fish, eggs, nuts, and seeds, which actually do have protein in them as well, soy and dairy. And then in the starch category there, bread, cereal, pasta, crackers, rice, potatoes, sweet potatoes, yams, yuca or cassava, yautía, rouleau, green bananas, plantains, corn, peas. Beans actually, they have starch and fiber. They also have protein, so they could kind of go in either category. And then a beautiful long list of a lot of non-starchy vegetables. So just to give some other examples, you could do chicken with plantains with some salad. You could do ground turkey, maybe with some whole wheat pasta with some fresh tomatoes and onions. So just those combinations of food together, there's lots of different varieties that you can do, because there's nothing worse than feeling like you need to eat the same thing every single day. Okay. And then these are just some pictures now that I have of different examples of meals that kind of keep these guidelines in mind. So top left, we have some salmon with some quinoa with mixed roasted vegetables. In the middle there is a stir fry with some brown rice, mixed vegetables, and some chicken. Bottom left, we have gadillo, which is ground beef simmered with tomatoes and beans, a mix of olives and raisins, served over rice with a side of a vegetable. In the middle there at the bottom, it's grilled meat with corn, which we know is a starchier vegetable, with a bell pepper and apple coleslaw. And then on the right is actually a picture of mine. I wanted to include a breakfast example. So we have the carbohydrate is our toast. And then we have this egg scramble for protein, and there's greens actually mixed into the scramble. So all of this can be applied to breakfast as well, but understandably, sometimes breakfast will look a little bit different. Anyone have any opinions of which looks best to them or something they would be interested in eating?
I'll do the avocado toast.
The avocado, okay, yes. I actually don't know if I put avocado on it at the time, but it definitely would be good underneath the eggs and the scramble there with some avocado underneath, which would provide some healthy fat. Okay. So next I wanted to talk about eating well on a budget. So these are a couple of tips that you can use to try to decrease the cost of foods when you're grocery shopping. So the first one there, choose fruits and vegetables that are in season. So I included the picture on the right is actually from the USDA has a website that you can go to, which tells you which fruits and vegetables are in season right now. And those tend to be more affordable options if you buy in season. So I included which ones are in season for spring. So you can see, I know it's a little small there, so I'll read out some of them, but things like apples, asparagus, bananas, broccoli, carrots, celery, collard greens, kale, kiwi, lettuce, mushrooms, onions, pineapples, spinach, strawberries, Swiss chard. So that's one resource that you can use to help choose fruits and vegetables that are in season. Looking for sales and buying in bulk can also help. Eating more plant-based, which I kind of touched on earlier when we were talking about plant-based protein. The plant-based protein sources like beans, lentils, or tofu can be more affordable options compared to meat or fish. And that doesn't mean that you have to stop eating any meat or fish products. But if you wanted to try, you could try even having like one plant-based meal per week or a couple plant-based meals per week, which could help decrease some of the cost of the groceries for the week. The next one is buy frozen or canned fruits and vegetables. So if you're concerned about fresh produce going bad quickly, which could result in food waste, you can always use canned or frozen fruits and vegetables, which have a longer shelf life, we could say. There's no nutritional difference between fresh, frozen, or canned, with the exception of I would look for canned fruits and vegetables that don't have any salt or sugar added to them. Sugar more so for the fruits and salt more so for the vegetables. So that can always be assessed by looking at nutrition labels. So it always says sodium, how much sodium is there on the nutrition label, and that's really another word for salt. And then the next one, choose canned fish. So if you want to be eating more fish, but the cost of fish can be high, sometimes buying canned fish can be more affordable, like canned tuna, sardines, or salmon, ideally canned in water or with a little bit of olive oil. You still, though, want to look out for the sodium with the canned fish. So checking the nutrition label or seeing if you can find no salt added. And then the next point is one that I definitely need to use a lot, which is make a grocery list and stick to it. So when we go to the grocery store unprepared, we might start grabbing things. Oh, this looks good. That looks good. Not really thinking about what we're going to do with it, but just thinking about it in that moment. And that could maybe lead to buying things that we didn't really need, which obviously can make the price of our groceries go up a bit. So if you plan ahead, plan out what you exactly need for the week and try to stick to that, it can help you save money as well. And then the last thing, preparing meals at home. So cooking meals at home, if that's something that's available to you, can be more cost effective than purchasing meals from restaurants or getting takeout on a very regular basis. The other benefit is that you can make multiple servings to have throughout the course of the week. If, cooking every night seems daunting, you can always kind of cook in bulk so that you spend 1 or 2 nights cooking, but then you have a couple other nights that it's more just reheating and less time that you have to spend preparing the meals.
Got one more for you.
What was that?
I've got one more for you. I love growing scallions, cherry tomatoes, basil. A lot of these you just get them from the grocery store. Instead of throwing off the bottoms, bury them. Just plant the things.
Right.
And you can get, the scallions are wild. I mean, you plant a scallion, you don't actually get more scallions. They keep giving it a haircut. About once a week, I take 6 inches.
Wow. So do you, I think I actually did this once, but only with scallions. I know sometimes if you live in New York City, it can be hard to have access to planting some of these things, but if you have access to planting or gardening, absolutely, that is a great way to help save money. You're growing your food at home. So
You can do it indoors. Just get a grow light. All winter long, I harvest tomatoes. I bought cherry tomatoes, and they just grow on a shelf.
Oh, wow. So you just put it right by the window?
No, I have a separate, I call it the seed nursery, just a plastic bookcase. And I bought a couple of these grow lights.
Oh, grow
all
lights.
winter long, I'm harvesting tomatoes. Basil does really well. Dill I found is a little problematic, but I'm not good at it. Scallions are easy, a bunch of things. You go to the grocery store, and they usually sell it to you with the little roots still growing. On the scallions, got all the little hairy roots at the bottom with the white bulb and then the greens. Just plant as deep as the white bulbs, and you're good to go.
That's awesome. So for people who maybe don't know, where could you get one of these grow lights?
You get them on Amazon.
Amazon?
$20, something like that.
Oh, awesome.
And some of them are regular light bulbs. Some of them come as flat panels. And don't quote me on this, but I think the color coming out of that is like what they call seasonal affective disorder satellites.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
very bright and very cheery. Basically, if it's good for the plants, it's good for you too.
Got it.
You don't
Wow.
stare at it, but it's in the environment. And I get up in the morning, there are my plants grinning at me. It's cheerful.
Right. I was just going to say, sometimes having that too is good for just to see things growing around you. It can be helpful with mood as well. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Good to know about the grow lights. Anything else anyone wanted to share? Any tips that they have for eating well on a budget? Okay. All right. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is eating well for the environment, because again, with our topic for National Nutrition Month, sustainability is something that we wanted to touch on. So eating well for our planet. So on the next 2 slides, I included the reference at the bottom there, but it was a an article published in November 2022 titled Health and Environmental Impacts of Plant-Rich Dietary Patterns, a U.S. Prospective Cohort Study. And then I included a quote from the article there. So the food supply chain is responsible for approximately 25% of all human-generated greenhouse gas emissions and uses approximately 70% of the planet's consumptive freshwater withdrawals and nearly 40% of global land. So one thing that we can do to help with the environment and our impact on the environment is eating more plant-based. So plant-based diets have been shown to be both beneficial for our health, but also for the environment. And this study kind of looked a little more at that. When we talk about plant-based diets, we want to focus more on whole foods, less processed foods in terms of the benefit for the environment. So the researchers wanted to determine the effects on both cardiovascular risk and environmental impacts associated with different healthy eating indexes. So one was including animal products, and then they included 3 different plant-based dietary patterns, which had both what they called a healthy plant-based and an unhealthy plant-based diet. So according to the article, the unhealthy plant-based diet included things like refined grains, added sugars. Diets with higher unhealthy plant-based diets were associated with a higher risk of coronary heart disease compared with plant-based diets that are rich in whole grains, legumes, nuts, fruits, and vegetables, which would then have higher scores on the healthy plant-based diet index. They found that animal-based foods, especially red and processed meat, contributed most to greenhouse gas emissions and the use of cropland, irrigation water, and fertilizer. They also found that whereas healthy plant-based patterns were associated with indicators of better human and environmental health, including significantly reduced cardiovascular disease risk, greenhouse gas emissions, and use of cropland, irrigation water, and fertilizer, the unhealthy plant-based patterns were associated with adverse human and environmental health effects, including significantly increased cardiovascular disease risk and use of cropland and fertilizer. So their kind of findings were that not just plant-based patterns, but actually healthy plant-based patterns were associated with positive effects on environmental and human health. So I thought that was an interesting kind of fitting article for this topic. Okay, so plant-based diets, sure, one thing. What else can we do to eat well for the environment? So the first one we already talked about, following a more plant-based diet. Next, shop locally. And you'll see there's some overlap between things that you can do to eat well on a budget and things that you could do to eat well for the environment, which is great. So shopping locally is another one that you can do for the environment. So if you purchase food that was grown near you, there's less fuel needed to transport that food to the grocery store or the market. Eating seasonally, again, another kind of repeat, can be helpful for the environment as well, since foods that are seasonal don't need to, again, travel as far to get to you. And you can use that website that I showed you before to guide you in that. Buying foods in bulk and choosing more minimally processed foods, along with choosing more plant-based food, can help reduce packaging, waste, energy, and water because less of all of these things are needed to produce them. And then we talked about, again, growing something yourself. So we now have tips about the grow lights that you can use even if you're in a New York City apartment and don't have access to a garden or anything like that. Still something that you could consider doing at home. And then lastly, invest in a reusable water bottle. So rather than relying on plastic water bottles, which you can't really use more than maybe once or a couple of times, if you have a nice reusable water bottle, you can take it anywhere with you and you can keep filling it up. Oftentimes, depending where you are, you can maybe even refill it on the go. So good way to stay hydrated. And then lastly,
Alexa,
yeah,
something else, farmers markets.
farmers markets, right? So shopping locally at your farmers markets. Is there a farmers market near you that you like to go to?
Well, there's one in Lincoln, right outside of Lincoln Center on Thursdays and Saturdays. There's one behind the American Museum of Natural History on Sundays.
Okay.
And Union Square, I forget the dates, but it's like, I think the whole weekend, Union Square
Yeah.
has a huge one.
Yes, I've been to
And this
that
stuff
one.
is fresh. This stuff is generally locally produced. And they were supporting.
Yes. And it's a great way too to get to know, like being able to talk to the people who actually grew your food can be really interesting to get kind of information from them about where the food came from, how it was grown, getting to know farmers. So very good point. Okay. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about, we talked about sustainable eating in terms of the environment, but sustainable eating for you is also very important. Sustainable meaning something that you can do long-term. So if you focus, the first thing that is to include foods that you enjoy, which I kind of touched on earlier. So if you focus so much on foods that you shouldn't eat, you tend to forget about all of the foods that you can add into your diet that you enjoy and that can provide more nutrients and give you more energy. So think about foods that you enjoy and that make you feel good when you eat them. And then number 2, focus on foods to add instead of foods to take away. So and this kind of goes with number 3, avoid restrictive, or we call them fad diets, meaning things, I mean, there's lots of different fad diets out there, including things like keto, Whole30, the blood type diet, the list kind of goes on and on. So sometimes these diets can be really restrictive and sometimes they cut out entire food groups, which often will make them not sustainable in the long term. Whole30, just the name of the diet itself, it's for 30 days. So, you know, sometimes people will see really quick results doing diets like this. But then after the diet is over, or once you realize you're not able to sustain it, which is not your fault, it's just the nature of following a restrictive diet. It's really hard to continue something like that. You might not see the results are lasting. So it's good to always think about if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. And following a more balanced diet usually is a more sustainable way. Think of your food choices as part of a lifestyle, not as part of a short-term diet. Be flexible with food choices. So, do you need to eat pizza every single day? Probably not. Does that mean that you can never eat pizza ever? Definitely not, right? Again, unless you're allergic to foods, there's no foods that you absolutely should never eat. Again, I'm sure there are exceptions, but only for health-related reasons. But you want to be flexible because the more flexible you have, the more flexibility you have, the more sustainable. If your favorite food is cut out of whatever diet you're trying to follow, it's very unrealistic that that's going to be a long-term solution for you. And then lastly, remember there's no perfect eating pattern. So I think oftentimes with food, there again is that want to be rigid and strict and do it perfectly. And if we mess up, then we did something wrong. Definitely not. Every person has unique nutrition needs and preferences, and all of those need to be respected and considered, which is why working with a registered dietitian can be helpful as opposed to reading things online, which really does not take into consideration who you are, your lived experiences, all of those things that guide your food choices. So that's my section, and we're going to hear from Rachel about physical activity. And we'll have actually Q&A, I think, at the end. So if you have questions for me, just remember them, and we'll have Q&A time at the end.
Yes, thank you so much, Alexa, for the wonderful presentation. Next, we have the pre-recorded video from Rachel. Jesse, can you share the video, please?
Okay, let me know if you guys hear it.
Thank you, Alexa, for that wonderful conversation on healthy eating. And I'm now going to move gears and talk about physical activity because we know that combination of what we put in our body and how we move our body are synergistic in helping us achieve our health goals. When we talk about physical activity, we want to recognize that there are different types of activity. Over on the left, you can see one of the most common types you might hear about is what we call moderate intensity aerobic activity. And this is the type of activity that gets your heart beating faster. This is also called like cardiovascular exercise, something that raises that heartbeat. The goal is to achieve at least 150 minutes per week of some type of aerobic activity. That could include, like you can see in these pictures here, biking, swimming, walking your dog, or maybe even chasing after your dog, and other ones pictured there. Those 150 minutes a week could be split up throughout the course of the day, so split up over 7 days a week, which would equate to roughly 22 minutes a day, which sounds a little bit more easy to tolerate than, recognizing a need to exercise for more than like 60 minutes a day. But for those who might be short on time but have longer periods of time, maybe on weekends or 1 day a week, you could concentrate that 150 minutes over the course of 3 to 4 days instead of 7. The idea is anything to get moving. The other type of exercise is muscle strengthening exercises. And those are activities that make your muscles work harder than usual. The goal here is to achieve muscle strengthening activities at least twice a week. And the recommendations don't have a specific amount of time. So I tell my patients, what are you comfortable with starting with, right? You can always build up from there. Maybe it's 5, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 15 minutes to start and could go up from there. I also tell patients that it doesn't have to be anything, you don't have to be at a gym to be doing muscle strengthening activity. There's plenty of exercises that you can do from the comfort of your home, with or without weights. I have patients, especially since COVID, using cans of beans, water bottles as weights, thinking about using your own body as gravity. You can see in this image here, the picture of someone doing a plank. You could do squats, lunges, things that don't require any equipment. And recognizing if you're tight on time this week, starting with just 5 minutes, any activity at all is better than none. I also want to emphasize that flexibility and balance is also important. We want to make sure we're keeping our joints stable. We want to make sure we're having good posture and making sure we're doing these exercises with the right form. So making sure you're getting some flexibility and balance training can be helpful. I would like for you to think for a moment, what are the benefits of physical activity? What motivates you in terms of doing activity? There are a host of amazing benefits of physical activity, and these are just a snapshot of the many. But let's go around with these images here to follow along. We can see on the left, we know that exercise can lower your risk of heart disease and help you reach and keep your blood glucose or sugar in range, which could be important for people with pre-diabetes or diabetes, and really for normal people and helping keep their blood sugar at normal ranges. We also know that exercise can improve your balance, range of motion, and muscle strength, and help people achieve weight goals. So for those people who might be losing weight or for people who might be maintaining weight, exercise can help them achieve those goals. Exercise can also help you sleep better and sharpen your focus and lower your stress and feel better. I have to say there's really that true feeling of those natural endorphins and how those can help you feel better when they're really expressed a lot after exercise. People often feel better, and I remind my patients, think about how you'll feel after exercise. I know sometimes it can be hard to motivate you to get out and do something, but just think about how you'll feel after. And oftentimes that's what really can help motivate people. I want you to also think about simple ways to add physical activity. Our goal is to make it work. We know that a lot of you guys are New Yorkers here, and we're all People may be very busy and it might be hard to find structured time to add activity. But I want you to recognize things that you're probably already doing are counting. So let's take a look at some examples. First, you could use the stairs instead of the elevators. I know for me, I live on a very high floor, so not really realistic for me to walk up 20 plus flights of stairs. But even just walking up a few, let's say to your home, or walking up a few flights of stairs at your office, and then taking the elevators the rest of the way. Or maybe just walking down. For some people, walking down the stairs could be easier than walking up. So even just getting some steps in the downwards motion counts just as well. You could also walk instead of drive when you can. Or thinking about getting off the subway or bus to stop sooner and using that time to walk. I think about our weather we're having in the city, and as we get into spring here, we'll hopefully have warmer days. I know a lot of my patients are excited to, get out of their hibernation mode from winter and start moving their bodies. So all of these ways, from a commuting perspective, from a going up into your home perspective, all count. You could also play active games with your partner, children, or pets. You could do chair exercises while you're sitting watching TV, or if you're on the phone, you could be doing stretches on the chair. You could be doing different movements. And also, let's not forget about housework or gardening. I don't know about you, but sometimes I build up a sweat from vacuuming or doing housework. So always keeping in mind that those things count. I have patients who are out for hours in the garden. And they really are working a lot, more than they even know. So those are all great ways to think of physical activity. And I would encourage you to share in the chat if there are any other ways that you've added physical activity that you'd like to share with the group.
You left off the most important thing of all. It's supposed to be fun.
When thinking about building an exercise routine, I want to encourage you to make it fun. Think of what, again, will motivate you to step out and move your body. So I would like for you to think for a moment, and I have this picture here of someone dancing as they're moving. So think about what ways you have found exercise to be fun. And also, we want to keep this as collaborative as possible. Feel free to write in the chat or share with your neighbors about ways that you have found exercise to be fun. Some examples are, firstly, pick an activity you enjoy. Right? If someone says, oh, you're supposed to, run 6 miles a day, or you need to be in the pool every day, maybe that's not realistic for the person. I know I can't jump in a cold pool if I was told to. So you want to think about an activity that you enjoy. Include friends and family if that's an option for you, not only to help you enjoy it more, but also it helps with accountability. If you have a scheduled time of your walk during your lunch break or after work, it's helpful to have a point person to help hold you accountable. Dance to your favorite music, maybe keeping track of daily steps, which are often being tracked in the background if you have a smartphone, or if you're wearing a wearable device that's tracking steps. And that could be a fun way to track your steps and say, oh, okay, I'm going to try to work on achieving 7,000 steps per day for this week, and maybe I'm going to work towards getting 8,000 steps the next every day for the next week. So it's a great way to keep motivation up and something to track. There are also a lot of apps out there that track different health goals. There's fitness apps, MyFitnessPal, Nike Running Club. The list goes on. So there's also great ways of apps that could send you reminders, give you motivation, send you new videos every day, just to help keep you engaged and keeping it diverse. And so that way you never kind of get burnt out from the monotonous of activity. There are, again, so many ways to find activity. And lastly, listening to music or your favorite podcast. Maybe it means taking a couple extra loops around your park, or walking a couple extra blocks with your dog. And sometimes having some music to listen to or a podcast can be helpful. All right. Now, when we think about introducing more physical activity, I want to share a couple of these tips, safety tips. The first one is always checking with your healthcare provider before starting any new exercise routine. There might be some specific limitations unique to your medical condition that you want to get clearance from your doctor. I also have some patients who haven't exercised maybe in a really long time and aren't even sure where to start. And so having that discussion with your healthcare provider can be helpful. Maybe there's an opportunity to get a script for physical therapy to help you to determine some safe exercises to do. I also work with a lot of patients with diabetes, and when they are embarking on a new exercise routine, I always want to make sure that they come prepared to exercise. And one of those ways is making sure that they have a glucose meter with them, or they're wearing a continuous glucose monitor so that they could really be able to monitor their glucose before, during, and after exercise and make any decisions that they need to make if needed. For example, it's important if someone has diabetes to bring a source of carbohydrates with them in case their blood sugar goes too low from exercise. So always being prepared and talking with your healthcare team about what that will look like for you is important. Next, it's important to listen to your body. And I encourage everyone to start slow. When people meet with me, we talk about a plan of starting exercise, they are ready to hit the ground running. But I caution them, you don't want to be lifting 20-pound dumbbells when you haven't been lifting in a while. You don't want to be, running for 2 miles if you haven't really run for that long or jogged. So always starting slow and building up from there. Next is wearing comfortable clothing and properly fitting shoes. Drinking plenty of water both before, during, and after exercise. Another helpful tip is scheduling activity, just like you might schedule other appointments to help with that accountability, like I alluded to earlier with a friend or family member. Scheduling it in your calendar, highlighting it, color coding it, whatever will help you to stick to that goal. And lastly, start small, achievable goals. Again, you might really want to seek to achieve 10,000 steps per day, as you might hear in the media, right? That's a number to work towards. But again, starting with something that's a little bit more than what you're doing. Maybe if you're doing 4,000 steps per day, working towards 4,500 or 5,000 steps per day and building up from there. What you've kind of been hearing today a lot is about behavior change and how that does take time. So we want to make sure we're being kind to ourselves, being realistic with ourselves in what seems achievable. So maybe it's starting with one day of introducing a longer walk that week. Maybe it's introducing 1 day a week of some extra weightlifting activities and seeing how it goes. And having regular follow-ups with your healthcare team would be so helpful to help support you in achieving them. So with that, we are so grateful that you joined our National Nutrition Month presentation, and we have shared a variety of different both nutrition references here, activity resources here for you to learn more and continue to educate yourselves on the benefits of lifestyle modification to support overall health. So with that, we want to summarize here about combining different food groups to help create that balanced plate. The benefits we've talked about eating sustainably for yourself and for the environment. And for activity, when adding it in, start simple. And remember that any movement counts. So feel free to, stand up, move your bodies after this talk. We are so grateful for your time and attention and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. We'll open it now up to some questions.
Thank you so much. Everybody stay safe.
Yes. Thank you so much, Lisa and Rachel. We're going to open up for Q&A. You guys are welcome to ask any question or write it in the chat. Thank you, Alexa, for the wonderful presentation. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and thank you so much again. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So long.
Bye.
So long.